Now, let your eyes rest. Let your breath soften, like the fall of snow over rooftops. And come with me to a village no one remembers. A small village, curled between the folds of the Alps, so old that even the pines seem to bow in silence around it. There are no carriages here, no stone towers, no merchants calling in the streets, only the hush of snow, only the warm, steady glow from one window, still lit after sundown. This is where Thomas lives. Thomas is a candlemaker. His cottage is made of thick stone, softened by moss and snow over the years. A crooked wooden door leans slightly left, and smoke whispers from its chimney like a secret into the night sky. Inside, it's warm. The fire cracks and hums low. The air smells of tallow, pine ash, and old parchment. Every surface glows with the breath of flame. A copper pot sits above the hearth, bubbling gently. Its contents, melted animal fat. Tallow, the humble wax of ordinary villagers. In the 13th century, tallow was common, practical, but not without care. It had to be cleaned, filtered, heated slowly. Too hot, and it smoked. Too cool, and it clumped. Thomas knew the balance by heart. He stirs slowly with a long wooden ladle, carved with faded swirls near the grip. Not rushing, not guessing. He's done this 1,000 times. And yet, each night feels like the first. The wind outside murmurs, brushing past the shutters. Flames reflect in his deep brown eyes. Across the room, thick cords of wick hang from wooden hooks, waiting to be dipped. He lifts one now, loops it once around a small stick, and lowers it into the pot. The wax coats the cord, thin at first. He raises it, waits, dips again. Layer upon layer, the candle forms, like time building itself, one breath at a time. He hangs the candle gently to cool, and begins the next, dipping, lifting, waiting, dipping again. Outside, the snow has begun to fall, big, slow flakes, heavy with silence. Through the frost-blurred window, candlelight glows out into the dark, like a lighthouse for dreams. Thomas hums a tune from his childhood, a simple melody passed down from his grandfather, who also made candles long before. He pauses his work and takes a worn wooden box from the mantel. Inside, oak-carved stamps, spirals, stars, the sun, the eye, the stag, witch marks, the villagers call them. Some believe they keep away misfortune. Others say they invite guidance. To Thomas, they are memories, symbols of people, places, and moments. Each one pressed into wax with silent intention. He takes the spiral mark, his favorite, presses it softly into the base of a still warm candle. A soft click, and it's done. In medieval belief, the spiral meant more than eternity. It was the path of life, the cycle of seasons, the turning wheel of breath. Each candle Thomas makes is more than light. It is a message, carried in flame. He places the stamped candle on the windowsill. The others line up beside it, each one glowing faintly in the firelight. And slowly, the room fills with warmth. A sacred hush settles over the walls. You can almost hear the past breathing. Each flame flickers with a rhythm of its own, as if it remembers something long forgotten. A time when candles told stories, when monks walked dark halls with a single light in hand, when night came early and flame was a shield. Thomas steps back and watches. A smile tugs at his weathered face. He feels no need to speak, only to breathe, only to listen. The wind has calmed, the wax has cooled, and the candles wait, patient and perfect. In the stillness, he whispers, "Let there be peace tonight." And in answer, the flames bow ever so slightly. Outside, the stars arrive, silent and countless. Inside, only the sound of wax hardening and the gentle, living hum of fire. The first flame is ready. Settle deeper into stillness now. Let the night hold you and drift with me through candlelight and time. The candle shop is quiet, but beyond the workroom, behind a narrow wooden archway wrapped in ivy and cobwebs, there is another space, a space Tomas rarely enters, a back hall, lit only by two wall sconces and the faint shimmer of wax pools on the floor. It's colder here. The stones feel older, as if they belong to a time before names. Tomas walks slowly now. His worn boots whisper against the stone. His hand trails along the wall, feeling shallow grooves etched long ago. At the end of this hall is a door. Not just any door. A low, rounded arch of oak, stained with soot and age. Its center bears a spiral, not painted, not carved, pressed, as though the wood once softened, and something ancient left its mark. Thomas reaches into his apron and takes out a candle, one he made just hours ago, the first of the night, the one marked with the same spiral. He sets it in a stone holder just beside the door and lights it. The flame curls upward, flickers once, then burns, steady, and slowly the spiral on the door begins to shine, just faintly, just enough to see the wood grain shimmer in rings like ripples on water. This door, this spiral door, was not built by Thomas. It was part of the cottage when he inherited it from his grandfather. And his grandfather never opened it. But one snowy evening years ago, Tomas lit a candle here by accident, and the door whispered open. Behind it was not a room, but memory, a place woven from scent and flicker, from dream and silence. Not a portal, not a spell, but a kind of echo of every candle made with true care, of every night someone sat beside the flame alone or afraid, and found peace. Tonight, Thomas opens the door again. It does not creak. It simply sighs, and beyond it lies a spiral staircase, descending. He takes another candle and steps slowly down. Stone steps curve gently underfoot. They are worn smooth, by feet or by time he does not know. The air smells of earth, wax, old wood, and something sweet, like dried lavender. As he walks, the flame casts long shadows, shapes that seem to bow in passing. He arrives at the bottom, and there, carved into the wall, is a mural, a fresco, faded and delicate. It shows a row of villagers, young and old, each holding a candle toward the sky. Above them, the moon shines not as a crescent, but a spiral, and below them, the ground glows with sleeping roots. Tomas stares. This place was built to remember, built to remind the candlemaker that light is not made by hand alone. It is made with patience, with story, with stillness. He kneels and places his candle in a small brass dish at the base of the wall, and in the quiet, a warmth fills the room, not heat, but something gentler, as if the mural itself remembers every hand that's come before, as if the spiral is a promise that even in darkness, something always turns, always grows. Thomas closes his eyes. He hears the wax settle, the flame breathe, and in his chest, a calm begins to rise, slowly, like fog lifting from a frozen lake. He does not stay long. Places like this are not meant to be held, only visited. So he stands, takes one long breath, and climbs the spiral once more. As he reaches the top, he turns. The mural below glows softly, then dims. He closes the door behind him, and it fades back into stillness. Only the candle remains, its flame steady, its message quiet, but alive. In this place, every door is a memory, and every spiral is a path home. Let your breath move like a feather now. soft, weightless, slow. And let us return to the village, to a quiet morning after snowfall. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the sky is lifting. From deep indigo to the palest pearl, faint birdsong hums beneath the frost. Chimneys whisper trails of smoke, lazily spiraling into the cold air. The village stirs, and so does Thomas. His fire still hums gently from the night before. Embers glow like sleeping stars beneath the grate. He wraps his shawl tightly and reaches for a bundle wrapped in wool. Inside, 3 finished candles, each marked with a spiral. He chooses one, the tallest, the cleanest, the one that burned evenly the night before. He wraps it again and steps outside. The snow crunches beneath his boots like crumbling paper. His breath clouds the air as he walks the narrow, winding path through the village. The rooftops above are steep and heavy with frost. Small icicles dangle like glass ornaments from every eave. He passes by the baker's stone oven, still cold. The chapel's iron bell, silent and still. And then he reaches the old widow's house, a low wooden cottage with a crooked fence, once painted blue. A small pot of ivy hangs by the door, clinging to life through the cold. Thomas knocks gently. 3 soft taps. No answer. He knocks again, a little firmer, then hears the creak of footsteps within. A latch opens. And there she stands, Agnes, her back bent by time, her silver hair tucked in a woolen cap, her eyes, though dim, warm with memory. "Thomas," she says, voice soft like worn parchment, "I thought you'd come today." He smiles and unwraps the candle. "I made this one for you," he says. "It's quiet. It burns slow." She accepts it like one might accept a letter from a loved one, with reverence. She steps aside and invites him in. The cottage is simple. A stone hearth, 2 chairs, a wooden table worn smooth by hands no longer here. One corner holds a collection of drying herbs. Another, a small painted icon of St. Bridget, whose candle once burned for peace through the longest nights. Agnes places the candle in a wrought iron holder near the hearth. With a flint and care, Thomas lights it. The flame flickers, then steadies. It casts soft light across her wrinkled face, smoothing its lines like gentle hands. She exhales slowly and closes her eyes. "There," she whispers. "That's better." Thomas nods, and for a time they sit without speaking. The flame dances between them. Its light fills the corners of the room. Its warmth joins the quiet fire already burning. After a while, Agnes speaks. "Do you remember when my William passed?" Thomas nods gently. "He died in winter, just like this one. The nights were long. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even pray. I would just sit here with the dark." She trails off. "But your candle," she says, opening her eyes again. "That year, you brought one, marked with a spiral." She smiles faintly. "It was the only thing I lit. I didn't even speak for 3 days, but I lit it." And then, almost as if surprised by her own voice, she adds, "And it helped." Thomas looks at the candle. The flame is small, but it leans gently, almost listening. "In some villages," Thomas says softly, "they say candles carry prayers upward, that the spiral is like the soul's path, winding toward the stars." Agnes nods. "Maybe it is, maybe it's just warm light. But sometimes that's enough." Outside, the wind rustles the ivy at her window. Thomas rises. "Would you like another for next week?" She nods. "Please, one that burns a little longer, perhaps. It keeps me company when the wind sings too loud." He smiles, bows slightly, and walks back into the morning. The village is beginning to wake. Smoke thickens in the air. Voices rise from doorways. Footsteps on snow grow more frequent. But in one little cottage, at the edge of the lane, a single candle glows in the window. Its spiral mark catches the light. Its flame sways slightly, not from a draft, but as if acknowledging its place in someone's quiet heart. Let your shoulders drop now. Feel the warmth return to your chest. And listen, as our tale finds a voice in the form of a song. The next candle Thomas made was different. It wasn't for a house, or a chapel, or a bedside table. It was for a traveler, a stranger who came one dusk with a lute slung over his shoulder and a hunger in his eyes, not just for food, but for listening. The village rarely welcomed outsiders in winter. Snow blocked the mountain roads, and wolves grew bold after sundown. But this man wore a heavy cloak trimmed in dark fur, and his boots bore the dust of long-forgotten cities. He called himself Dorel, a bard, one who walked with stories instead of maps. He arrived just as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, painting the snowfields in soft rose and violet. Thomas met him by the old well near the center of the village. Dorel bowed low, as bards often did, and asked only for a small place to rest, and perhaps a warm drink. Thomas saw the wear in his eyes, the kind that even a good night's sleep couldn't erase. He offered him the seat beside his hearth, a bowl of barley soup, and a corner of his workbench to lay his pack. Later that night, when the wind whispered against the shutters and the pot of wax rested, Darrell plucked his lute strings softly. He sang, not loudly, not for applause, but quietly, as though telling the fire a bedtime story. He sang of a village buried in lavender, of a knight who whispered instead of shouted, of a lost bell tower that only rang for the lonely. Thomas listened, and between those songs, Darrell spoke of a fear he carried. He had forgotten how many places he'd passed through, too many candles lit in taverns, too many faces seen only once. And some nights, he feared, his own stories might forget him. He paused then, looked into the candlelight between them, and whispered, "I need something to remember me by, even when I'm gone." Thomas nodded slowly, and the next morning, before the bard departed, Thomas handed him a candle. This one was slimmer, wrapped in cloth stitched with tiny spirals, pressed into the wax at its center, a mark not often used, a quill crossed with a flame. Darrell smiled. "This is beautiful." Thomas said nothing, but inside he knew that this candle was more than wax. It was memory sealed in silence. It would burn only once, but its story would last longer than fire. The bard left that morning. Snow followed behind him. His footprints stitched a path through the frost, and the sky watched silently. Weeks passed, but one night, deep into January, a package arrived at Thomas's door, wrapped in rough parchment, sealed with wax pressed by a lute string. Inside, a folded note, and a small sketch on vellum. The note read, "I lit your candle on the third night beside the river Leant, where the trees grow silent and the stars hang low. I played no songs that night, but the flame hummed for me. I remembered every village, every name, including yours. Thank you." The sketch was of the candle, half-burned, resting by a stone, its flame reflecting in still water. Thomas closed the note with care. He added it to a box he kept on the top shelf, a box filled not with coins or tools, but notes, letters, small tokens, all from people who had once, just once, held a candle he made. It reminded him that his work reached farther than the village edge, that light once shared could drift across rivers, past borders, even through time. And so, that night, he made another candle, this one thinner still, marked with a small crescent moon and a single note carved below the spiral. He called it the Bard's Flame, and though he had no one to give it to just yet, he knew somewhere someone would arrive with tired boots and a voice full of memories, and Thomas would be ready, because stories, like candles, are made to be lit, even if only once, even if only for the quiet. Inhale, softly. Let the quiet settle like snowfall on your chest, and follow now to a place of stone and silence. Just before sunrise, Thomas stood at the edge of the village square, a bundle of candles wrapped carefully in linen slung over his shoulder, each candle marked with a spiral, each one dipped and pressed with slow hands, each one whispering its own warmth. He was headed to the chapel. The small stone church stood at the far end of the village, tucked beside a grove of bare-branched trees. Its steeple was crooked and short, hardly grand, but no less sacred. Its stones were dark and moss-covered, some as old as the first candles Thomas had ever made. This was not a place of sermons, not of thunder or flame, but of echoes, and echoes need soft light. The chapel's wooden doors opened slowly at his touch. Inside, the air was colder than outside, but it was peaceful, still, steady, like the breath of earth itself. The ceiling arched low, painted long ago with fading stars. Pews of hand-carved oak creaked quietly beneath his steps. At the far end, the altar waited. Not gilded, not towering, but dusted in lavender and draped with simple linen. The only light came from a few wavering flames, left burning through the night. Thomas knelt before them. Then, one by one, he unwrapped the candles. The chapel keeper, Brother Alric, entered without a word. A soft-faced man with eyes like river stones, and a voice rarely raised above a whisper. Together they placed the candles into the tall wrought iron stands, each one steady, each one waiting. Alric lit them slowly, reverently, and the chapel changed. The light seemed to stretch upward, climbing the walls like golden ivy. Dust glowed in the air like soft stars in orbit. Even the cold seemed to pause and warm itself in the stillness. Alric spoke. "We light these not to see, but to remember." Thomas nodded. The spiral-marked candles, once private, now joined in song. A hymn without notes, a chant of flicker and shadow. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but inside, the world was still. Alric opened a small wooden cabinet behind the altar. Inside were wax stubs, burned down to their bases, each one labeled with names. They weren't names of saints, but of villagers. Names like Marga, who died before the frost came, and Peter, who used to bring a single apple every Sunday. For each name, a candle had once burned. Thomas looked closely at the markings. Many bore his spirals, some carved with loops or circles, some with nothing at all, but soot and wax curled into memory. "These," Alric said, "are not grave markers, but footsteps." Thomas understood. In many medieval churches, candles were burned not just for the dead, but for journeys, for transitions, for forgiveness, for peace that might not yet be found. And here, in this stone chapel, far from Rome or Canterbury, a candlemaker's quiet art had become prayer. Alric gently placed one of the oldest stubs into Thomas's hand. It was small, misshapen, the spiral barely visible beneath the ash. "This one," he said, "belonged to a child. He never lit it, but it stayed beside his bed all winter." Thomas closed his hand around it. He did not speak. There were no words for some kinds of reverence. Only breath, only flame, only the hush between them. He placed it back with the others, then knelt before the new candles once more, and in that moment, something stirred. The candlelight flickered, not with wind, but with recognition. The flames leaned inward slightly, toward the altar, toward one another, as if bowing in silence. Alric and Thomas remained still. 2 men, 1 chapel, 20 candles, and time holding its breath. After a while, Alric whispered a final line of a prayer, too old to trace. It was in a language neither of them fully knew, but its tone felt like rest, like the soul curling softly beneath a woolen blanket. Thomas rose. He left the chapel without words. Outside, the sky had turned golden blue. Birdsong lifted from the forest edge. The scent of baked rye drifted through the village. But behind him, in the old chapel, spiral-marked flames continued to glow, carrying warmth, memory, and every silent story into the day. Let the hush of leaves guide your breath now, in and out. As we follow the trail into the forest, the trees on the edge of the village were old. Their roots curled like sleeping animals beneath the soil. Their trunks stood in silence, thick with moss and mystery. And their leaves whispered stories in a language only wind could speak. Few ventured there in winter, but Thomas did. He walked the winding footpath, carrying a single candle in his satchel, wrapped in velvet, marked with a leaf-shaped spiral. This candle was not for a home, nor for a chapel, but for someone who lived far from the village's warmth. Her name was Anselda. The villagers called her the Forest Woman. Some called her healer, others witch. But Thomas knew her simply as one who listened. She lived in a moss-covered hut beside a stone spring, beneath the thickest canopy of pine. It was said she never left the forest, not even for bread or salt. But when a child was sick or a fever would not break, they sent for her, and she always came. Thomas had met her once, years ago, when his brother had fallen ill. Anselda had arrived in the night, barefoot, with a bundle of herbs and a vial of something that smelled like stars and rosemary. She had lit a candle in the boy's room and whispered things the walls seemed to remember. And by morning, his brother had woken. Since then, every winter, Thomas left her a candle. Not by request, not by payment, but by quiet tradition. This year's candle was special. He had dipped it during the darkest night of the month, pressed into it a spiral made of twigs, gathered from the forest edge, and carved along its side a winding ivy vine, like those etched into ancient apothecary walls. The path into the trees narrowed. Snow clung to the low branches. The air was thick with pine and stillness. Thomas walked slowly. His breath fogged before him in quiet puffs. He passed under an arch of holly, past the frozen brook with stones shaped like flattened moons, and finally reached the clearing. There stood the hut. Its thatched roof sagged under snow, and its shutters were dark. But smoke curled faintly from the chimney, thin as a thread. He stepped toward the stone stump near the door, the place he always left the candle. Gently, he set it down. He unwrapped the velvet, revealing the golden spiral. It shimmered faintly in the forest light. With a flint, he sparked a flame. The candle lit instantly. Its glow felt warmer than usual, as if the forest, too, were listening. For a moment, Thomas stood there, watching the flame sway in the breeze. Then, from behind the door, he heard a sound. Not a voice, not a creak, but the soft rustle of fabric, the hush of someone breathing, just beyond the wood. He did not knock. He only whispered, "For warmth and whatever else you need," then turned and left. The candle remained on the stump, its flame growing steadier with each step away. As Thomas walked back through the trees, he felt no fear, only quiet, only the calm one feels after sharing something unspoken. When he reached the edge of the forest again, he looked back. The candle still burned, and though the hut was silent, a small brown bird landed beside the flame, tucking its wings as if to stay a while. That evening, back in the village, Thomas sat beside his own fire. He thought of the woods, of the herbalist, of the flame in the snow. He imagined Anselda watching it from the shadows, perhaps with a small smile, perhaps not. But he knew, deep down, that light had found her, and in that knowledge, his own room felt brighter, because sometimes the greatest gift is one left quietly, unseen, unclaimed, but known. Take one slow breath in and exhale like a ripple across water. Our next story drifts gently downriver. There is a river that cuts softly through the edge of the village, the River Lynn. It flows beneath a single arched stone bridge, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, boots, hooves, bare heels of children and travelers alike. Beneath this bridge, the water moves slowly in winter, thick with frost, yet never fully frozen. It hums its own song, deep and endless. And it is here, beneath this old bridge, that Thomas brings his candles each year, to remember those who no longer walk the path. These are not named candles. They carry no spiral markings or etched sigils. They are simple, pale, unadorned, but sacred. The villagers call them soul lights, a tradition older than even the chapel's stones. Some say the practice began when a knight was lost in battle and his mother, unable to find his body, floated a candle downstream each year in his name. Others say it was a healer's act, guiding spirits back home. Whatever the origin, Thomas had always believed in the ritual's quiet power, that even those forgotten by name are not forgotten by light. It was just after twilight when he arrived, a sack of wooden candle holders strapped to his back, each one hand-carved from local birch, each one built to float. Inside a small satchel, 8 thin candles. He knelt by the bank, the icy earth crunching beneath his knees. The bridge overhead cast a long shadow, but the last glow of the sun painted the river in soft purple and gold. The first candle was for those lost to winter, wanderers, elders, those who fell ill when snow was thickest. He set it gently on a disc, lit the wick, and nudged it forward. The flame danced, then caught the river's pull, and drifted downstream. The second was for those who left the village and never returned, merchants, minstrels, lovers. The third, for children buried before their first snowfall. The fourth, for the unknown. And the fifth, he always saved this one. He lit it, hands trembling slightly. For the stories that never got told, he whispered, and set it adrift. The candle floated slowly, then caught up to the others. 6th and 7th followed, each flame mirrored in the water, each reflection a small soul, cradled by the current. The last candle. Thomas held in his hand longer than the rest. He didn't know who it was for. Perhaps no one. Perhaps someone he had once known and forgotten. But he lit it anyway, and breathed, just in case. As it joined the others, he sat back. The river was dark now, but dotted with glowing flecks of gold. The candles curved around the river bend like stars following a path only they knew. Thomas closed his eyes, listened to the water's voice, and let the cold settle into his bones like soft music. When he opened his eyes again, the last candle had just rounded the bend, its light smaller now, but still present, still steady. He stood and packed his empty satchels, dusted off his knees, and looked once more beneath the old stone bridge. Above him, a raven perched quietly, watching. As Thomas turned to leave, the bird cawed once, low but not harsh, like a bell rung, not in alarm, but remembrance. Back in the village, no one would ask where he had gone, but some might notice that the river that night seemed to shimmer a little longer, and those who walked the bridge at dawn might catch a scent of beeswax in the breeze, a hush, a warmth, as if the river itself had carried whispers into the dawn. Because in the world Thomas lived in, some prayers are sung, some are whispered, and some are lit and set adrift beneath a bridge older than grief. Let your thoughts grow still now, and follow the breath into the hush of morning mist, where something curious waits, without sound or heat. The candle appeared without a sound. It was just past dawn. The village was wrapped in mist, the cobblestones still damp with the breath of night. Tomas stepped outside his cottage, boots soft on the frost-dusted threshold, and saw it there, a single candle resting in the exact center of his doorstep. No note, no sign of who had placed it. He bent slowly, carefully. The candle was smooth, pale ivory, its surface unusually cool. But what struck him most was the spiral, not drawn with soot or carved lightly with a knife, as Thomas often did. This spiral had been pressed into the wax so deeply it nearly touched the core. He held it up to the light. No scent, no waxy smear on his hands. Just silence. Still, he brought it inside. He placed it on his work table, beside his tools and bowls of cooled wax. Perhaps it was a gift. Perhaps someone had tried their hand at candle making and left it in homage. He smiled faintly at the thought, and fetched a match. With practiced ease, he struck a flame and touched it to the candle's wick. Nothing. The flame sputtered, then died. He tried again, and again, still nothing. He examined the wick. It was there, tight and woven, just like all others, but it would not catch. Thomas, now curious more than puzzled, fetched a fresh wick and swapped it. Still no flame, no scent of smoke, no curl of burn, only stillness. He set the candle down and watched it. It sat on the table like a quiet guest, present, but untouched by fire. He stepped back, and in that moment felt something, a memory, a weight. It wasn't fear, not quite. It was more like pause, like the world for a second waited to see what would happen next. Tomas wrapped the candle in soft cloth and set it beside the hearth. He brewed tea, swept the floor, went about his morning, but the candle stayed on his mind. That evening, after returning from the chapel, he sat beside it again. He lit one of his usual spiral-marked candles. Its flame bloomed instantly, casting warmth across the wooden walls. Then he placed the unlit candle beside it. For a moment, the two candles stood side by side, one burning, the other untouched. And Thomas watched. As the evening deepened and frost crept over the windows, the flame of the first candle began to lean toward the other, as though pulled, drawn, and for a brief instant, so quick he wasn't sure he saw it, the wick of the second candle glowed, not burned, glowed, a soft pulse, like the ember of something waiting to return. Then it dimmed again. Thomas felt his heart beat slow. He whispered aloud, as if to someone unseen, "Who are you for?" The candle said nothing, but its spiral seemed to deepen, as if it listened. He left both candles there overnight. In the morning, the first candle had burned to its base. The other remained untouched. And yet Tomas sensed it had changed, not in shape, but in presence. as if it now carried something with it. A message, a memory, or maybe a waiting. That afternoon he returned to the chapel. He showed the candle to Brother Alric. The monk took it gently, held it to the light, and smiled in that quiet way monks often do when they do not fully understand, but trust anyway. "There are some candles," Alric said softly, "that do not burn for this world." Tomas didn't ask what he meant. He only nodded and brought the candle home. That night, he placed it in the window, facing the village, facing the road beyond the trees, and left it there, unlit, still, but not forgotten. It would remain there for many days, and sometimes, in the silence before dawn, passers-by would glance at the cottage and say the window looked strangely warm, even when no flame burned. And in this village, where spirals marked more than wax, and candles held more than light, even an unlit wick could carry peace. Breathe as if the air is made of starlight. Feel the cool of night around your shoulders. We walk now toward the quiet hill, where even the sky listens. There is a hill just beyond the village's last field, not high enough to be a mountain, not low enough to be forgotten. It rises gently through meadows and frost, where old stones jut like broken teeth and wild herbs sleep beneath snow. They call it the Watcher's Rise, because from its crest, the stars feel near enough to touch. Tomas had not climbed it in years, but on the night of the winter solstice, when the sky stretched darker than any ink, he took a candle. He wrapped it in dark cloth, carried it beside his heart, and walked the narrow path, winding through moonlight and memory. The village lights fell behind him. One by one, roofs disappeared, then fences, then the smoke of hearths. All was quiet now, only the crunch of his boots on frozen ground, and above him, the vast velvet sky. The stars blinked slowly, not cold, not distant, but ancient, like old storytellers waiting to begin. At the top of the hill, the wind met him. It wasn't harsh, only aware. Tomas stood a while in the open, breathing it in, then knelt. He unwrapped the candle. This one was dark blue, rolled in crushed lavender and silver dust. Its spiral was carved not around, but upward, as if climbing. He had made it years ago and never burned it, because it was for a time like this. He placed it on a flat stone, lit it, and stepped back. The flame was small against the cosmos, but it did not waver. It stood calm, steady, warm against the pull of the wind. Tomas sat beside it and whispered, "This is for those who've left this world, not just this place." He thought of his father, a man who never saw his own age, of his aunt who crossed the mountains and was never heard from again. He thought of the lost, the wandering, the ones whose names were written in letters that never arrived. And then he thought of the stars themselves, how they burned quietly above, night after night, their light older than memory. Did they remember us? Did they watch? He liked to think they did, that somewhere, every time a flame was lit on earth, a star twinkled a little brighter in return. The candle burned slowly, its light circling upward like a breath released skyward. He watched it for a long while, and as the hours passed, the stars shifted. A constellation overhead formed the ancient pattern known as the spiral crown, a looping cluster used by medieval sailors to guide them across the seas. Tomas smiled faintly, that sailors once followed stars, and he followed flames. It felt right. The hilltop was silent, but full of memory, full of old things speaking in soft ways. When the candle had burned halfway down, Tomas reached into his satchel. He took out a slip of parchment. On it, no words, just a single spiral drawn in ash. He folded it, pressed it against the candle base. The wax softened and sealed it there. Then he left it. He descended the hill slowly, not looking back, not needing to. The candle would finish its work. It didn't need a watcher. It burned for those who no longer had breath, and for those yet to come. Because sometimes, one flame beneath 1,000 stars is enough to remind the sky that we are still listening, still remembering, still lighting the way. Inhale the scent of spiced bread. Let the murmurs of laughter drift softly into your ears. The candles are ready, and the market is calling. Once each year, on the final week before deep winter settled its full weight, the village opened its square to the winter market. It was not grand. There were no knights in armor, no minstrels singing tales from far-off kingdoms, but there was joy, warm, soft, and shared. The stalls were draped in woolen blankets and evergreen garlands. Steam curled from copper pots of mulled cider. Children's cheeks flushed pink beneath fur-lined hoods. Thomas always arrived early, not to sell, not to barter, but to give. He set up a small wooden table at the edge of the square. No sign above it. No prices. Just a row of candles, each wrapped in simple cloth, marked with tiny spiral stamps. There were only 12 this year. He never made more, because these weren't for lighting rooms. They were for lighting something else. A neighbor's smile. A memory returned. A promise kept quietly between breaths. The first to approach was a boy, no older than 7. He stared at the candles with wide eyes, his mittened hands clasped behind his back. Thomas leaned down and whispered, "You may choose one, but only if you promise to light it during a snowstorm." The boy nodded solemnly. He chose a candle with a silver thread wrapped near the base and ran off, showing it to his sister like a treasure. Next came a baker's daughter. She offered Thomas a small loaf in trade. He refused it kindly. "Take the candle," he said, "and light it when the first flowers bloom. It will help them find the sun." She smiled, took one wrapped in soft green fabric, and tucked it beside her scarf. Each visitor received the same. A gentle instruction, a quiet ritual, and a candle meant for more than fire. An old man took one to place on the windowsill for his late wife. A traveling weaver took one, promising to light it the next time she sat beneath moonlight with thread in hand. By midday, only one candle remained. It was the smallest, wrapped in red cloth, marked not with a spiral, but with 2 tiny dots side by side. Thomas had made it by accident, but somehow it had waited. A young woman approached. Her eyes were tired, her breath quick. She said nothing. Thomas simply placed the candle in her hands. "No rule for this one," he murmured. "Just light it when you need someone near, even if no one is." Her lips trembled. Then, a small, grateful nod. She walked off into the swirling snow, the candle tucked gently beneath her shawl. And then, the table was empty. Thomas sat back on the stool. Let the sounds of the market rise around him, children laughing, wheels squeaking over ice, fires crackling beneath iron kettles. He closed his eyes. Let the warmth settle on his chest, not from flame, but from connection. All around the village, his candles would find their way into corners and cupboards, onto shelves and beside beds. They would wait, not for power, not for praise, but for moments, moments of stillness, of sorrow, of joy too soft to name, and they would glow. Thomas packed his cloths, folded the table. As he turned to leave the square, a light snow began to fall. Flakes landed gently on the cobblestones, on rooftops, on cloaks and banners and brows. The villagers didn't hurry. They let the snow fall like a lullaby, and one by one, small candles began to appear in windows, soft flames dancing behind glass. The village glowed, not from torches, not from fire pits, but from dozens of quiet, spiral-marked lights, each one a hush, each one a memory, each one a whisper of hope. And above them all, Thomas walked home, candleless, but not empty, because sometimes you carry light not in your hands, but in your heart. Close your eyes gently now, and let the hush of memory open like a wooden door, long forgotten. We go now to the place where the spiral first began. That night, Thomas dreamed, not a dream of flames or stars or hills, but of a wooden floor, smooth with age, covered in dust and curls of wax. He stood in the doorway of his childhood workshop. The air smelled of old oils and dried rosemary, a scent so familiar it pulled warmth into his chest. The fire in the hearth crackled low, steady and patient, and in the middle of the room sat a boy, no older than 9. His hair was tousled, face dusted with soot and curiosity. He held a lump of cooled wax in his hand, and a simple bone-carved stylus. With slow hands, he traced a spiral, wobbly, uneven, but with care. Tomas watched in stillness. He recognized the moment, a memory tucked deep inside him. This was the first time he ever made a candle marking. He had seen the pattern once, on a tapestry brought by a traveling monk. The monk had said it was a symbol of journey, of returning, of remembering. Thomas, the boy, hadn't understood all that then, but something about it felt right. So he carved it, looping once, twice, then back toward the center. He lit the stub of wax with a shaking hand, and the room bloomed with gold. The spiral glowed faintly beneath the melting edges. Back in the dream, the older Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. Not sadness, but something softer, like greeting a version of yourself you forgot you'd once been. The boy looked up. He didn't speak. He only nodded, as if to say, "You kept going." Thomas knelt beside him. He reached toward the table, where more candle scraps lay, each one unmarked. He picked up a piece, and with the same stylus, Tomas, the man, carved, slowly, reverently, following the same looping rhythm he had first etched so many winters ago. One spiral, then another, each turn smaller than the last, curling toward the center. He didn't need to think. The motion was in his hands, in his breath, in his memory. The boy beside him watched silently, eyes wide but calm. And as Thomas finished the last curl, he set the wax beside the fire. It caught the light. For a moment the spiral glowed not from flame, but from within, as though every candle he'd made since, every gift given, every ritual, every whisper, every night beneath stars, had lived in that first small motion, that first spiral, carved in a child's hands, lit with a trembling heart. The dream didn't fade quickly. It lingered, soft and warm, until Thomas opened his eyes and found himself back in his own bed. The window glazed with frost. The fire burned low. But on the work table near the hearth sat a stub of wax, small, unlit, marked with a spiral. He didn't remember placing it there, but he wasn't surprised. He rose slowly, wrapped in wool, walked over to the table. The spiral was rough, wobbly like a child's, and that made it more precious. He struck a match, lit the wick. The flame flared gently, and in the silence of his cottage, he whispered, "To where we begin, and return again." The spiral danced, and Thomas sat beside it, remembering not just a candle, but a beginning. Because in a village where candles held meaning and spirals guided the soul, even a forgotten wax stub could become the center of everything. Let your breath soften like candlelight against old stone. Step slowly through the chapel doors, where every footfall echoes with hush and history. The village chapel was the oldest structure in the valley, older than the blacksmith's forge, older than the stone bridge, older even than the trees surrounding the village. Its stones were uneven and thick. Its roof sagged just slightly with the weight of time. And yet, it stood, unshaken. Each year, near midwinter, the villagers gathered there for what they called the rekindling. It was not a feast, nor a sermon. It was a silence, a candlelit ritual of breath and flame. And Thomas had been asked this year to help the chapel keeper prepare. Brother Ewan was a quiet man. His robes smelled of wax and cedar. His beard was gray with the patience of decades. When Thomas arrived, the chapel was cold and dark. Only the distant echo of his boots filled the space. Ewan greeted him not with words, but a nod. He handed Thomas a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside, 12 thick beeswax candles, each one heavy, smooth, marked with spirals deep and ancient. These were poured in the old way, Ewan murmured, with ash from last year's flames. Thomas ran his fingers over the carvings. They weren't his spirals. They were older, more rigid, yet more deliberate, as though made with purpose known only to those who had long since passed. They're memory marks, Ewan said, each one carved by the previous keeper, and the one before that. He held up one with a double spiral. This one remembers the plague years, he said softly. Another had a tiny cross set within the spiral, for the healer who gave her light to the sick. One by one, they placed the candles on the altar. The chapel smelled of old stone and beeswax, and then Ewan struck the first flame. He held it to the central candle. The wick flared, slow and golden. It burned steady, unhurried. They lit each one in silence. No bells, no chants, only breath and warmth. Thomas found himself slowing. His hands moved with reverence he hadn't expected. His thoughts quieted. The outside world fell away. With each candle lit, the chapel brightened, not harshly, but softly, as if light had returned home. Once the last flame flickered to life, Brother Ewan stepped back. He looked at Thomas, then spoke, not as a keeper, but as a witness. These flames carry not just fire, he said. They carry presence. Thomas nodded. He understood, because every candle told a story, even if its wax never spoke aloud. They sat on the pews side by side, saying nothing. The candles glowed, their light reflecting in the chapel's old stained glass, blue, amber, crimson. The spirals danced along the walls, echoing centuries of devotion. Thomas reached into his satchel. He hadn't planned it, but his hands found a small taper, one of his own making. It bore a spiral of soft curves and tiny stars etched into the sides. A simple candle, but his. He placed it at the far corner of the altar. Brother Ewan said nothing, but his eyes softened, and with a nod he struck a match. Together they lit it. The flame rose quietly, joining the others, and in that moment Thomas felt something shift, not in the air, but in himself, as though the act of placing his own light among the old ones was a kind of permission, a way of saying, I am part of this too, not just the village, not just the season, but the story, the spiral, the light. When they left the chapel, the candles remained, flickering behind thick glass, and those who passed by in the days to follow said the chapel looked warmer than ever before. not from heat, but from memory, woven gently into flame. Breathe gently now, as if dust is settling softly through the air. We walk with hush through wooden shadows, toward a flame that never asked to be found. It had been some time since Thomas had cleaned the far corners of his workshop. Behind shelves lined with wax bowls and stacks of linen, beyond the small jars of dried herbs and powdered soot, there was a narrow gap where the wood met stone. He hadn't thought of it in years, but on that gray afternoon, after the chapel candles had burned low, something nudged him. Not a sound, not a voice, just an urging. He moved aside the shelf. The wood creaked as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Dust floated upward in a golden column from the high workshop window, and there, nestled in the crook of stone and timber, a candle, unwrapped, untouched, unmelted. Its wax was black, not dyed but naturally dark, as if formed from something older than tallow or beeswax. A thin spiral of silver dust wound around it, almost invisible unless the light caught it just right. Thomas reached out, slowly, gently. The candle was cold, but not lifeless. Its wick was intact, slightly frayed, yet it had never been burned. He turned it in his hands, examining the spiral. Not one of his. Not any style he'd seen in the village. It felt foreign and familiar. Both. As though it had waited for him, but not from him. He brought it to his table, lit a small lamp, and stared. Where had it come from? Who had made it? It wasn't there the last time he'd swept behind the shelves. He was certain. Still, he didn't feel fear, only respect. As if whatever this candle carried had waited long enough. He struck a match, held the flame to the wick. It caught, not with the usual flutter of orange, but with a low blue pulse. The flame was steady, almost still. It did not dance. It did not shift. It simply was. Thomas sat back. Let the silence fill the room. Something was here, not a presence exactly, but a memory, a watching. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet, a sound formed. Not from outside, not even in the air, but deep in his thoughts. A whisper, like words half-spoken in sleep. You've lit every flame for others. Now this one is for you. Thomas felt his chest loosen, his shoulders sink. The whisper didn't come again, but it didn't need to. He opened his eyes. The candle's blue flame still glowed, soft, unwavering. It lit nothing around it, no shadows cast. Yet the room felt illuminated from within. He let it burn for a while. Minutes, hours. Time didn't seem to count here, and when he finally stood, he did not blow it out. He placed the candle in a small carved alcove near the center of his workshop, a spot where morning light would kiss it, where he could see it as he worked, where it would keep him company, not as a tool, but as a presence. The flame never dimmed, never needed trimming, never demanded more wax. It burned like breath, like memory, like the core of something he had always been building toward. From then on, when Thomas made his spiral candles, especially the ones he gave, not sold, he'd glance at that quiet blue flame, and somehow his hands moved steadier, his spirals curled smoother, his wax cooled softer, because now he was not only the giver of flame, he was accompanied by it. And when the nights were long, and the world outside was bitter and still, the black candle with the silver spiral burned just the same, waiting no more. Let the hush of snow guide your breath. Let the glow of 100 windows settle gently on your chest. This is the night the village remembered how to shine. It began with a whisper, not a spoken word, not a note on parchment, just a knowing that passed from one villager to the next, like the quiet pass of a candle flame. That on the final night of the deep winter stretch, when the longest darkness settled across the valley, each home would light a spiral-marked candle. At the same moment, no bells would ring, no festival would call them forth, just light, all at once. Thomas did not organize it. He only felt it coming. So on the morning of the longest night, he walked to the square and placed a bundle of candles on the stone fountain, each one wrapped in cloth, each one marked with a spiral. No name, no price. Just a note pinned gently to the side. Tonight, when the moon is highest, light your window. He left it there and returned to his workshop. The snow fell all day, soft as feathers, blanketing the world in quiet. Children played, mothers baked, fathers swept steps twice over. But the candles were taken, one by one, as if each person already knew what to do. That evening, no one knocked on doors, no one gathered in the tavern. By moonrise, the village was still, and then, one by one, the lights began. First a cottage near the northern edge of the fields, then another 2 lanes over, then 3 at once in the square. From Thomas's window the valley began to glow. No torches, no lamps, only candles, each marked with a spiral, each carrying a hush too deep for words. From above, the village must have looked like a necklace of stars, resting against the snow. Inside his cottage, Thomas lit his own. Not the black one in the alcove. No, that one never moved, but one of soft ivory, carved gently with a rising spiral. He set it near the window, facing outward, and watched. No shadows moved, not on the streets, not in the fields, not between houses. It was as if the darkness had paused, not vanished, not fled, but stilled, as if waiting or watching. Thomas stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath his boots. No wind, no sound. And yet warmth seemed to rise from the village itself. A warmth not of heat, but of presence. He walked a short way toward the chapel, passing house after house with glowing windows. Inside each one, a spiral candle, its flame steady. Each one mirrored by calm eyes, quiet families, silent reverence. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was safe, as though for one night nothing could break the spell of stillness. Thomas reached the chapel door. He didn't open it, just stood there, and in that silence he saw them. Faint at first, then clearer. Footprints, not fresh ones, glowing ones, as if pressed into the snow long ago, but only now visible. They wound from the chapel door toward his own workshop, faintly glowing with a pale silver light. Spiraling, he followed them, not hurried, not afraid. Each step took him past candle-lit homes. Each face that glanced from a window offered only a nod. No need for words. Back at his workshop, the footprints ended at the door. Thomas opened it. The black candle still burned in the alcove, its blue flame steady. He stood before it and bowed his head. The glow of the village pressed gently through the window panes, touching the walls like lullabies. In that moment, Thomas felt something shift inside. Not a change, but a return to a truth older than words, that when people light their windows together, no shadow dares to stay. Feel the snow hush the earth beneath your feet. Let your breath meet the morning air like smoke from a sleepy chimney. We follow now the path that makes no sound, toward a spiral carved by something older than hands. The morning after the night of candlelight, Thomas rose early, the kind of early where the world still holds its breath. No footprints yet on the streets, no smoke from chimneys, just the soft silver of snow glow and silence. He wrapped himself in wool and stepped outside. It was colder than the day before, but not unkind, the kind of cold that asked for stillness. As he wandered past the chapel and down the small lane toward the woods, something called him, not loudly, not urgently, just a pull, like a ribbon wrapped around his chest, guiding him gently. He followed without questioning. The forest greeted him as it always had. Tall trees with limbs like old arms, snow cradled in every crook. Twigs crackled beneath his steps. Tiny birds rustled, invisible in the branches above. And then he saw it. A clearing, small, tucked between oak and pine, and in its center, a spiral pressed into the snow. Perfect, unbroken, unmarked by foot or paw. Its lines looped inward, slowly narrowing toward the heart of the clearing. Thomas stopped at the edge. The air here felt different, not heavier, not colder, but aware, as though the spiral had eyes. He knelt, reaching a hand toward the edge. Didn't touch it, only hovered just above. The snow had not been swept or shoveled. It wasn't disturbed. The spiral had formed, as if laid by breath. He stepped into it. The snow gave softly beneath his boots. He followed the curve, each step deliberate, each turn drawing him inward, and with every loop the forest around him seemed to quiet further, until the only sound was the beat of his heart and the soft crunch of his own path. When he reached the center, he paused, looked up. The trees leaned inward, their branches forming a gentle canopy. Above, the sky was pale gold with rising sun. A single bird passed overhead, silent. Thomas took a breath, and then another. And as he stood there, he heard something. No, felt something. A low, humming calm that vibrated beneath the snow, beneath the roots, beneath his very breath. It wasn't music, it wasn't speech, it was presence. The same presence he had felt lighting the chapel candles, the same that whispered through the spiral wax, the same that flickered in his dreams. He closed his eyes and saw, not with sight, but memory, spirals. On cave walls, in ancient cloth, in the center of a mother's lullaby, in the pattern of flame as it rose and fell. The spiral wasn't a symbol, it was a language, and the snow had spoken it. Thomas knelt in the center, scooped a small handful of snow, held it gently, let it melt between his palms, then whispered, almost without knowing why, "I remember." A wind passed through the trees, not loud, not sharp, but purposeful. The spiral behind him softened. As snowflakes began to fall, fresh, light, barely visible. When he stepped out of the clearing, the spiral slowly disappeared behind him, hidden by new snow, as though it had never been there, or had always been. Back in the village, the candles still flickered in windows, and Thomas now carried something more than wax and wick. He carried the center of the spiral itself, and he knew. Whatever came next, he would follow it, step by step, loop by loop. Back toward the quiet heart of light. Let the twilight settle upon your shoulders like a warm shawl. Let the sound of wooden wheels and gentle glass clinking guide your breath. The lantern maker has arrived, and with her, the night will glow in new ways. It was near the end of winter's hold, when the snow began to melt in sighs instead of silence, that a stranger entered the village. Her cart creaked behind her, wooden, sturdy, trailing faint notes of warm resin and old journeys. She wore a cloak the color of old parchment, with silver thread sewn into patterns that shimmered like stars when the firelight caught them. No one knew her name. She gave none. She only smiled and said, "I trade in lanterns, but they carry more than light." Her voice was low, not rough, but smooth, worn like river stones. Tomas had just returned from the chapel when he heard the murmur near the square. Villagers gathered, not with clamor, but with curiosity. Children leaned forward, eyes wide. Old men sat quietly watching, and in the center of it all was her cart. Dozens of lanterns, each one different. Some round like full moons, some tall and slender like watchtowers, some shaped like stars, 5, 6, or spiraled. Each glowed softly, no flame inside, just light. Alive, but still. The lantern maker reached into the cart and held one up, a blue glass globe with a curling wire spiral across its face. She didn't speak. She simply placed it into the hands of a child. "Touch the top," she whispered. The child did, and the lantern flared, not brighter but warmer. Within its glass, images danced, not painted, not carved, but light, forming moments. A boy carving a candle, a spiral in snow, a chapel glowing. Thomas felt his heart still. They were his moments. Somehow they had traveled into this stranger's lantern. He stepped forward gently. The lantern maker turned to him. Her eyes were clear and kind and deep with time. She offered him a lantern unlike the rest. It was shaped like a teardrop, pale silver glass, with a waxy spiral melted inside, suspended mid-air, as if frozen in motion. "I made this from silence," she said softly, "for the one who listens." He took it in both hands. The lantern felt familiar, though he'd never seen it before. She leaned close. "Not all lights are made of fire," she murmured. "Some are memory, some are dream, and some are the shape of the path we walk." Then she stepped back. No gold exchanged hands, no names, no farewells. She pulled her cart quietly from the square and vanished into the evening fog, just as the first stars began to blink awake. That night, Tomas hung the lantern in his window. Its silver glow didn't flicker, didn't dim. It pulsed like breath, and within its glass, more images began to form. The faces of villagers, the chapel's ancient spiral candles, a child cradling a candle with 2 dots near the base, the black candle glowing steady in his alcove. They moved like memory, but alive, like the light was showing him not just what had happened, but what belonged to him, what belonged to them all. He sat by the window, watched the lantern for hours. Outside, more lanterns began to appear in other homes. The villagers didn't ask where they came from. Some said they woke to find one on their doorstep. Others said it appeared in a corner of the room, softly humming. Each one different. Each one glowing. Each one telling its own quiet story. And for nights afterward, the village did not sleep early. They sat near lanterns. They watched light move through memory, and they remembered, together. It was a new kind of candlelight, but it spoke the same language, soft, spiral, sacred. And in his window, Thomas's lantern whispered a promise without words, that some gifts are not made with hands. They arrive quietly and leave you gently changed. Let the hush of garden earth fill your lungs with soft silence. And let each step upon the frost-kissed path remind you, some things bloom when no one is watching. It had been many weeks since the village lit their windows as one. The candles still flickered in corners and alcoves. The lanterns still whispered their stories in silver glow. But now, the days had begun to stretch again. The snow no longer fell in heavy silences, but in soft, thoughtful dustings. Tomas found himself walking more often, past the fields, past the chapel, toward the forgotten places. That was when he remembered the walled garden, old, stone-lined, hidden behind the edge of the apothecary's home. No one had tended it in years. Once it had been a herb garden, wild with rosemary, valerian, and mugwort. Now it was quiet, seemingly asleep beneath winter's touch. But something pulled him there. On an afternoon thick with pale light and drifting clouds, Thomas stepped through the ivy-covered gate and stopped. The snow had settled like a quilt across the earth, but it was not smooth. It was patterned, spiraled. Everywhere he looked, faint indentations curled like wind-carved designs. Not footprints, not shovels, just gentle swirls. Thomas walked slowly, and as he reached the center of the garden, where a cracked stone bench still waited, he saw them, small flowers, blooming in winter. Their petals curled gently, following the pattern of the snow beneath them. Soft colors, lavender, creamy white, pale amber. They glowed, not with fire, but with memory. He knelt beside one. Its stem was delicate, but steady. Its heart held a golden spiral. He reached out, brushing the bloom with one finger. And suddenly, just for a breath, he heard something. Not with his ears, with his chest. A tone, like a memory of laughter wrapped in a lullaby. Then it was gone. He leaned back, heart soft. The garden wasn't growing from seed. It was blooming from light, from memory, from presence. That evening, Thomas returned with a small satchel of wax chips and dried herbs. He didn't come to harvest. He came to add. He pressed the wax gently into the snow beside the flowers, marking spirals around the blooms. A quiet offering. The next day, the spirals had softened, melted just enough. But more flowers had come, and others had followed. A child brought a spoonful of ash from a candle his grandmother had once burned each winter. He whispered something into the soil before burying it near the wall. An old man placed a smooth stone carved with a spiral in the center path. A mother and her daughter sang a hymn as they tied ribbons to the garden gate. No one told them what to do. No one organized the offerings. The garden listened, and the garden remembered. By the end of the week, 100 small blooms curled across the spiral paths. Some glowed faintly at night. Others pulsed when hands passed near them. They were not magic in the way of stories. They were memory, returning to bloom, and the villagers called it simply the Spiral Garden. Some said it had always been there, hidden by time. Others believed Thomas had awakened it. Thomas didn't claim either. He only visited daily, sat on the old bench, lit a small candle, and whispered, "I remember." Sometimes the wind whispered back, not in words, but in petals, in scent, in light. The Spiral Garden did not replace the chapel or the lanterns. It did not ask for attention. It only offered a place. To plant what cannot be spoken, to bloom what was never forgotten. And when spring finally arrived, gentle and shy, the garden bloomed in full. But its heart remained shaped like a spiral, and its light remained soft as breath. Let your thoughts drift upward, slow as rising warmth. Let the hush of height and stone settle gently over your shoulders. Above the village, a bell waits, and perhaps it never stopped ringing, just waited for someone to listen again. The bell tower above the chapel had not rung in years. Its rope had been removed long ago, its clapper tied in place. The stone steps leading up were worn smooth, and few climbed them anymore. It had been built centuries ago, when the village first gathered around candlelight and song. The bell was cast in bronze, thick and solemn, and at its base, half hidden by time and tarnish, was a spiral, faint. But there, Thomas had passed beneath the tower many times, but he'd never gone up. Until the morning after the garden bloomed. He felt drawn to it, not by urgency, but by invitation. A quiet pull, like a voice humming without breath. He asked Brother Ewan for the key. The chapel keeper handed it over without question. "Just listen," he said softly. "Don't ring." Thomas nodded. The stairs were narrow and steep. Each step creaked beneath his boots, echoing off the curved walls. Dust filled the air, not heavy, but old. He passed narrow windows where light streamed in at slants, catching flecks like golden snow, and at the top, the chamber widened. There it hung, the spiral bell. It was larger than he'd imagined. Its sides bore scratches, weathered by wind and time, but the spiral was untouched, not polished, not carved anew. It simply hadn't faded. Tomas stood beneath it. The silence was thick, but not empty. He placed a hand gently on the bell's side, and there, a vibration, soft, faint, as if the bell wasn't waiting to be rung, but already ringing, not with metal, not with sound, but with resonance. He closed his eyes, and the hum grew clearer, not loud, not sharp, but full, like the low note of a cello, or the memory of a lullaby hummed through walls. It pulsed gently beneath his palm, like a heartbeat. The spiral hummed too. It was not just a symbol, it was the shape of the sound itself, a sound that moved inwards, downward, then back again. Thomas sat near the window, watched the village below. Candles still burned in window panes, lanterns still glowed on porches, and the spiral garden, even from this height, shimmered faintly. He placed a small candle at the tower's edge, lit it. The flame did not flicker in the still air. It bent slightly toward the bell, as if listening. Tomas did not strike the bell. He did not try to pull the rope that was no longer there. He only listened. And in the deep quiet, he began to hear things that had no sound. The whisper of snow on rooftops, the hush of breath beneath blankets, the slow exhale of the earth waiting for spring. And beneath it all, the spiral hum, a tone that felt older than language, and somehow, impossibly, shaped like comfort. He stayed until the sun rose fully, and then he descended the stairs. The bell still did not ring, but in the days that followed, villagers began to feel it, not as sound, but as steadiness. Babies fell asleep easier, bread rose warmer, chickens laid more quietly, and when the wind blew just right through the village lanes, you could almost feel it, a spiral in the chest, a tone in the bones, like a reminder. Some things don't need to be heard, to be felt. And from then on, Thomas left a candle at the tower window each morning, not to call attention, but to say thank you, because the spiral bell was never truly silent. It had always been singing. It only needed someone to listen. Let the candlelight soften your breath. Let melted wax settle your thoughts like snow on stone. And listen now, as wax begins to speak what words cannot. She came to the village just after the first spring rains, an old woman, her cloak faded to the color of dusty parchment, her eyes a misty green that seemed always half closed, as if she walked between waking and dreaming. She carried no cart, no horse, just a small wooden case tucked under one arm and a thin walking stick wrapped with ribbons of pale linen. She introduced herself to no one, simply asked, softly, politely, if there was a corner near firelight where she might sit. Brother Ewan offered her the side chapel. Thomas offered her candles. She accepted both with a grateful nod. "I am a reader," she said simply. "Not of ink, but of wax." Most villagers didn't understand until they saw her work. She would sit in quiet corners, light a single candle, let it melt naturally. and as the wax pooled and spilled, she watched, eyes half-lidded, breath slow, and then she spoke. Not poetry, not prophecy, but stories, old ones, familiar ones, stories that had not been told aloud in decades. She told the tale of the blacksmith's wife, who once kept bees that whispered at night, of the boy who vanished into the woods and returned with moss in his hair and light in his hands, of a candle made from seawater that burned blue for 7 days and then sank into the ground. When asked how she knew, she'd only say, "The wax remembers, and sometimes it chooses to tell." Thomas watched her often. He never interrupted, until one quiet evening when she looked up from a melted pool of gold wax curls and said, "You have a candle that's never been read." Thomas blinked. She continued, eyes still on the wax. "Not the black one. That one reads you. I mean the one behind it, on the shelf, with the twin spiral." Thomas felt a shiver pass through him. He hadn't touched that candle in years. It had been a mistake, a test pour, with too much cinnamon in the wax and a double spiral that never quite curled right. He kept it out of habit, not intention. She smiled gently. "Would you let me read it?" He nodded. The next morning, they met in the spiral garden. The candle was pale honey, with 2 thin spirals climbing it like vines. Thomas placed it on a flat stone and lit it. They waited. The wax warmed slowly. It pooled in long, winding streams. One curled outward like a fern. Another dripped with strange pauses, then froze mid-air. She watched, not with intensity, but with reverence. And then she spoke. "This candle remembers a door." Her voice was soft, almost like she was reciting a dream. "A wooden door beneath your family home, long sealed, used long ago to store spiral molds and wrapped scrolls." Thomas leaned forward, heart slowing. He had seen such a door once, as a boy, but his parents had always said it was nothing, just old storage. She continued, "It remembers your grandfather's hands. He carved spirals by moonlight, not for trade, for protection." The wind passed softly through the garden. She traced one of the wax strips with her fingertip. "This candle remembers you, as a child with ink on your fingers, drawing spirals on scraps, even before you knew what they meant." Thomas's breath caught. He had forgotten that, but the candle had not. "It remembers something else," she whispered. She turned the candle gently in its holder, revealing a faint mark burned into the bottom. A double spiral, interlocked like waves. "Your bloodline, your story. You are not just a candlemaker." She looked at him fully now, eyes steady. "You are a keeper." Thomas felt the truth settle like warm wax around his chest, not heavy, just whole. He bowed slightly, not in disbelief, but in understanding. The wax reader nodded. "Some stories are too soft for books. They live in wax, in flame, in silence." And then she stood, walked slowly through the garden, left behind only a small taper candle, unlit, on the bench. Thomas watched her go. She did not return the next day, or the day after. But he did not worry. She had read what needed to be read, and in the quiet pool of honeyed wax, her story still glowed. Let your mind rise with the hush of twilight. Let the soft wind across the hill carry away what you no longer need. Tonight, we light the final flame, not to finish the story, but to rest inside it. The last snow had melted into the folds of the valley. The candles still burned in windows, but softer now, less for warding, more for remembering. And the lanterns hummed faintly in porches, warm with stories they had already told. Thomas felt it before he knew it, that a chapter was ending, not the story. Never the story, but the part of it that needed hands and wax and windows. He packed a small satchel, just a blanket, a flask of warm water, and one candle. Not the black one, not the double spiral. This one was different, made quietly, alone. It was tall and pale and smooth as river stone, carved with a single spiral that curved from base to wick. No breaks, no notches. He carried it out of the village as the last blue light kissed the rooftops. No one stopped him. They all knew. Some watched from doorways, lanterns in hand. Others nodded silently as he passed. The hill had no name. It didn't need one. It rose just beyond the last sheep fence, where wild thyme and stones lined the path. Thomas climbed it slowly, letting the wind guide his breath. At the top, the world opened. Below, the village glowed like a bowl of stars turned upside down. Every window, every flame, every spiral of light. He placed the candle on the stone at the summit, wrapped himself in the blanket, waited. The sky shifted from blue to violet to velvet. One by one, stars pierced the dark. And when the moment felt right, not for drama, but for stillness, he lit the candle. Its flame rose like a breath, steady, spiral. No wind touched it, no shadow crossed it, and slowly, something began to descend. Not a sound, not a shape, a presence, like warmth falling through the sky, like time folding gently around a story that had told itself well. The candle didn't flicker. It brightened, just slightly, casting a soft spiral across the snow-dusted stones. Thomas sat beside it, and the village below seemed to quiet further, as if listening, as if breathing with him. The final flame didn't carry answers. It carried rest. And as the wind whispered through the grasses and the stars formed quiet constellations above, Thomas felt the spiral turn inward one last time, not to close, but to keep. The bell tower below hummed faintly. The lanterns shimmered. The garden bloomed, even in moonlight. And all around him, the night wrapped itself around the flame like an old friend. He whispered nothing. Only let the warmth move through him, and when the flame burned low, he did not fear, because the spiral would continue, in wax, in snow, in silence, in every quiet moment that says, "You are not alone. You have always been part of the story." The candle flickered once, then settled into a soft golden glow that would not go out until the morning, and Thomas slept, wrapped in warmth, held by light, cradled by the spiral, at last.